I worked nights at a hospital for about 2 years, which meant I was getting home somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m. when the building was completely dead. I lived alone in a 4th-floor unit in a mid-size complex, the kind with an outdoor walkway instead of interior hallways, so you could see the parking lot and the other doors from your own front step. For most of that job, coming home at that hour was just routine, quiet, a little eerie in the way any empty parking lot at 4 a.m. is, but nothing more than that. About 8 months in, I started noticing my neighbour's porch light, the unit directly across the walkway from mine, was always on when I got home, no matter what time my shift ended. Every single night. I figured they just left it on as a habit. Some people do that for safety. Normal enough. Then I noticed that whenever I glanced over while unlocking my door, the blinds in their front window would already be slightly parted, like they'd just been let go. I never saw a hand, just the blinds settling, every single time, like clockwork, like someone had been watching me walk up and let go the second I looked. I told myself I was imagining a pattern where there wasn't one. Overtired brain after a 12-hour shift, that's a real thing. Your eyes play tricks. I kept telling myself that for weeks. Then the mornings started. I'd wake up around noon, my normal schedule, and find small things slightly off in my own apartment, not missing, just off. A chair pushed in that I remembered leaving pulled out. My phone charger moved from the outlet by my bed to the one across the room. My blinds, which I always left shut for sleeping during the day, cracked open maybe 2 inches, angled toward the walkway, angled toward their unit. I checked my locks obsessively after that. Deadbolt, chain, everything intact, no signs of forced entry, nothing on the little chain lock camera I ended up buying. Whatever was moving my things wasn't coming in through the front door, or wasn't leaving a trace if it was. I did the math I think anyone would do. Maybe the maintenance crew has a master key and comes in during the day for something, and I never asked. Maybe I'm sleep-moving things myself. People do things half asleep they don't remember. Maybe the wind through a cracked window is enough to nudge a blind 2 inches. That's physically possible. I wanted to believe all three. I checked with the leasing office about maintenance access. Nobody had been scheduled in my unit in 6 months. The night it stopped being deniable, I got home around 4:30 like always, and the porch light across the walkway was on, blinds parted like always, except this time I could see, just for a second, just a shape, not a face, someone standing right at the window, close enough that their outline blocked most of the light behind them, not moving, just standing there, facing my door. I didn't call out. I didn't wave. I just went inside, locked everything, and sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets until it got light out. I put in for a transfer to day shift not long after and moved to a different building entirely 6 weeks later. I never found out who lived in that unit. The leasing office wouldn't tell me, said it was against policy. I still don't sleep great with the blinds open, even now, even somewhere completely different. My sophomore year of college, I lived in an off-campus apartment with a roommate I'd met through a mutual friend, not someone I knew well beforehand. She was quiet, kept to herself, which was fine by me. I'm not a chatty person either. We split a 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a building, mostly rented out to students. The first month was uneventful. We had different schedules, barely overlapped, said hi in the kitchen sometimes. Totally normal roommate situation, nothing to report. The odd thing started small. She had this rule, stated pretty firmly on move-in day, that I should never go into her room, not even to grab something she'd borrowed, just knock and she'd hand it out. I thought that was a little uptight, but whatever, everyone's got their thing about privacy. I didn't push it. Then I started noticing she never seemed to actually leave her room at night. I don't mean she stayed up late. I mean I never once heard her door open after around 9 p.m. No bathroom trips, nothing, for weeks at a time. I chalked it up to her having her own bathroom situation figured out, or being a very deep, very still sleeper. Then the light under her door. It was on every single night, all night, every night, even nights she left for class early the next morning, looking exhausted, like she hadn't slept. I asked once if she wanted a lower wattage bulb, since I could see the light from the hallway, and she just said, "It has to stay on," and didn't explain further. I let it go. Then I noticed the sound. Not talking, not music, a low, steady sound almost like a fan or a hum. Except we didn't have a fan in that unit and the vents didn't run at night on their own. It was faint enough I could have imagined it, except I noticed it stopped completely on the 2 nights she wasn't home and started up again the second she got back. By this point, I was doing the thing where you try to explain your own roommate to yourself. Maybe she has insomnia and just lies in bed with the light on scrolling her phone. Plenty of people do that. Maybe the humming is a white noise machine and I just never saw it because I wasn't allowed in her room. Maybe she just really values her space. That's a completely reasonable thing for a person to want. Every explanation worked on its own. The night that broke the pattern, I came home late from a group project and the humming was different, louder, and underneath it, something that sounded almost like breathing, slow and deep, way too slow to be just her breathing normally. More like something breathing on purpose, deliberately, timed. I stood in the hallway outside her door for probably 90 seconds. I didn't knock. I didn't know what I'd even ask. The light went off under her door right as I was about to walk away. Not gradually, just off, all at once, mid-hum, and the humming stopped with it. I moved out at the end of that semester, told her it was a financial thing. She didn't argue, didn't seem surprised. I saw her once on campus a year later, and she looked at me like she didn't recognize me at all, which honestly might have been worse than if she had. My sister moved into a new apartment in a different city, and I flew out to help her get settled and stay for a week, sleeping on an air mattress in her second bedroom, which was still mostly boxes. It was a nice building, newly renovated. Nothing about it should have been unsettling. The first few days were exactly what you'd expect. Unpacking, furniture shopping, ordering too much takeout, catching up. My sister seemed happy with the place, no complaints. I didn't notice anything off at all, honestly, for the first 4 nights. It was the 5th night I first heard footsteps in the unit above us, which wouldn't be strange except my sister mentioned offhand that the unit above hers had been vacant since before she moved in, still being renovated, no tenant assigned. I asked if she was sure, and she said the leasing agent had told her explicitly during the walkthrough, empty, under construction, nobody living there. I told myself construction crews sometimes work odd hours. Maybe someone was up there finishing drywall at 11 p.m. Unusual, but not impossible. Then, the pacing pattern. It wasn't random walking, It was back and forth, along what would have been directly above the hallway connecting the two bedrooms, for almost 20 straight minutes, stopping right around the point where our air mattress was set up below, like whatever it was had reached the end of a route and turned around. The next morning I asked the building's front desk if there was a construction crew scheduled for the unit above. They checked and told me no work had been logged in that unit for over a week. My sister brushed it off, said maybe it was a different unit, and sound travels weird in these buildings, echoes off unexpected walls sometimes, which is true. Sound does do strange things in concrete construction. I wanted that to be it. I really did. The 6th night, the pacing started again around the same time, except this time it stopped directly above the air mattress, and there were 3 slow, deliberate steps. Then nothing. Then a full minute of silence. Then one final step, heavier than the rest, right above where I was lying. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning I told my sister I had a work emergency and needed to fly home 2 days early. She seemed disappointed, but didn't push it. I never told her the real reason, and she still lives in that apartment as far as I know. I think about that vacant unit more than I'd like to. I was doing a 3-month work assignment in a city I didn't know well, and instead of a hotel, I found a short-term sublet through a listing site, a 1-bedroom being rented out by someone who was travelling for the same 3 months. Seemed efficient. The place was clean, a little sparse, clearly someone else's real home with the personal stuff put away in a closet. The first 2 weeks were fine. New city, new routine. I was mostly just tired from work and didn't pay much attention to the apartment itself beyond sleeping and eating there. The odd thing started with the closet. The one closet in the bedroom was locked, which the listing had mentioned. Personal storage, please don't access. Completely reasonable for a sublet. People don't want strangers going through their stuff. I never tried the door. I want to be clear about that. What I did notice, about 3 weeks in, was that some mornings the little gap under that closet door had light showing through it, a thin yellow line, even though I never turned any light on in there and had no way to. I assumed a hallway light fixture was just visible from an angle, some trick of the apartment's layout. Old buildings have weird sightlines. Then I started hearing something from behind that door at night, not loud, more like shuffling, fabric moving, the kind of sound clothes on hangers make when something brushes past them. I told myself it was the building's heating system, ductwork running behind that wall. That kind of sound can travel through shared vents easily. Then, the thing I really couldn't explain, I woke up one night to find the apartment's front door, which I always double-locked, standing wide open, not forced, no broken lock, just open, and cold air coming in from the hallway. I checked the hallway. Empty. I checked my things. Nothing missing. I went through the reasonable options. Maybe I forgot to lock it, and the latch didn't catch. Tired people make small mistakes. That's completely ordinary. Maybe a building super has a master key for check-ins I wasn't told about. Sublets sometimes have weird arrangements like that. Maybe the shuffling and the light were both just old building quirks, stacking up to seem more meaningful than they were. Any one of those, fine. All of them together felt like too much. The night that ended it for me, I heard the shuffling from the closet again, except this time it was accompanied by a very faint, very specific smell, like fabric that had been kept somewhere unclean for a long time, and then 3 knocks, not from the front door, from the closet door itself. 3 slow knocks from the inside. I left that night, checked into a hotel for the rest of the assignment, ate the loss on the sublet deposit, and never told the owner why. I never found out what was actually in that closet, and honestly, I've decided I don't want to. I want to preface this one by saying I lived in that building for almost 3 years before anything happened, so if you're looking for an I moved in and it started immediately story, this isn't that one. This one built slowly, over a long time, and I think that's part of what made it so hard to see clearly while it was happening. The building had one maintenance man, an older guy who'd apparently worked there since before most of the current tenants moved in, quiet, kept a small office in the basement next to the laundry room, always polite in the hallway, fixed things fast when you put in a request. For most of those 3 years, he was just part of the background of the building, the way a good super should be. The first thing I actually remember noticing, and I didn't think anything of it at the time, was that he always seemed to know things about tenants he shouldn't have had a reason to know, small stuff, like commenting that I'd been away for a few days when I got back from a trip I hadn't told anyone about, or asking a neighbour how her new job was going before she'd mentioned to anyone in the building that she'd even started a new job. I remember thinking, that's a little odd, and then just moving on with my day, the way you do with 100 small oddities a year that never add up to anything. Then came the maintenance requests I didn't put in. Twice over the course of about 6 months, I'd come home to find a note on my door saying maintenance had come by to check something. A leak, a smoke detector, that I had never reported and, as far as I could tell, was never actually a problem. Both times the note said he'd let himself in with his passkey since I wasn't home. Both times, nothing in the apartment seemed disturbed. I told myself the building probably did periodic safety checks I just wasn't aware of, which, to be fair, some buildings do. Then I started noticing small things very slightly out of place after those visits. Not stolen, not obviously moved, just a couple degrees off from how I'd left them. A framed photo turned maybe 15 degrees from square, a drawer not quite pushed all the way shut. Things so minor that on their own I'd never have registered them. Except they kept happening after his supposed check-ins and never any other time. I did the responsible thing and asked a couple of neighbours, carefully, if they'd ever had similar unscheduled visits. 2 of them had. One described almost exactly the same thing, a note about a smoke detector she never reported. Small things out of place after. We compared notes, so to speak, and decided we were probably overreacting, that a super checking safety equipment without much warning was well within his job, and that noticing your own drawer slightly ajar days later doesn't mean anything happened. Memory isn't that reliable. Then it moved to the hallway. A few of us started noticing that the little decorative things people leave outside their doors, a welcome mat, a small potted plant, would occasionally be off-center or turned, always on days he'd been seen working somewhere on that floor. Small, deniable, easy to write off individually. Here's the part I still think about. One of my neighbours, the one who'd had the same unreported smoke detector note, mentioned to me almost in passing that she'd started keeping a small camera pointed at her own front door from inside her apartment. just facing outward through the peephole gap, because something about the pattern had started to genuinely unsettle her. She didn't catch anything for weeks. Then one afternoon she showed me a clip, just a few seconds, of him standing directly outside her door, not knocking, not doing anything, just standing perfectly still, facing the door, for what the timestamp showed was almost 4 full minutes before he finally moved on down the hallway like nothing had happened. We reported it to the building's management company. They were polite, said they'd look into it, and about 2 weeks later sent a notice that he'd retired, effective immediately. No further explanation offered, no apology, no acknowledgement that anything had actually happened. A new maintenance company took over shortly after. I want to tell you it stopped there, and that would be a clean ending, but here's the thing that still gets me. About 4 months after he left, I found a small folded note tucked behind the smoke detector in my bedroom when an electrician was in doing an unrelated panel upgrade and had to remove the cover. It was just a few words, no signature, in handwriting none of us could match to anything. And I'm not going to tell you what it said. I gave it to the building manager and never got a straight answer about what they did with it, if anything. I moved out at the end of that lease. I never learned where the old maintenance man went, or why he'd been standing outside that door for 4 minutes, or what that note meant, or who wrote it. 3 years of small, deniable things, and not one real answer at the end of any of it. I lived next to an elderly woman for about 1.5 years in a mid-rise apartment building, thin shared wall between our units, the kind where you can sometimes hear a TV through the drywall, but not much else. She kept to herself. I'd see her maybe once a month getting mail, always polite, never a problem neighbour. For most of that time, everything was completely unremarkable. I'd hear her television faintly some evenings, footsteps sometimes, totally normal apartment living background noise. The first odd thing was that starting around the 10-month mark, I stopped hearing anything from her unit at all. No TV, no footsteps, nothing, for almost 2 full weeks. I figured she'd gone to visit family or was in the hospital. Completely reasonable explanations for an elderly person to be away. Then I started smelling something faintly unpleasant near our shared wall, in the hallway, right by her door specifically, which I told myself was probably just old building smells, cooking odours that build up in carpet over the years, nothing necessarily connected to her being away. Then her mail started piling up in a way that seemed like more than 2 weeks' worth, overflowing slightly out of her mailbox slot, which did start to genuinely worry me, enough that I mentioned it to the building manager, who said he'd check on it. He came back and told me she was fine, just travelling, and had arranged for someone to collect the mail soon. I wanted to believe that, and mostly did, because what's the alternative? Calling emergency services on an elderly neighbour because her mail looked like a lot. Here's where it stopped adding up for me. About 3 days after that conversation, I heard her television come back on one evening, completely normal, like nothing had happened, and I felt relieved, genuinely. Except the TV that night ran at a strange, consistent volume, never changing, for almost 6 straight hours without a single channel change or volume adjustment, which isn't really how anyone watches television. Even someone falling asleep in front of it usually shifts the volume or wakes and changes the channel at some point. Then the smell by the shared wall came back, stronger this time, on the the same night the TV had started up again. I did the version of Logic Autopsy anyone would do here. Maybe she came home exhausted from a trip and fell asleep with the TV on a fixed volume and just never woke to adjust it. Older people sometimes sleep very heavily. Maybe the smell was unrelated. Maybe a pipe issue in the wall. Buildings develop those. Maybe I was pattern matching two unconnected things into something sinister because the timing happened to line up. I wanted every one of those to be true. The night I stopped being able to convince myself of any of it, I knocked on her door just to check in. Tell her I'd noticed she'd been away and was glad she was back. Nobody answered, though the TV was audible right on the other side of the door the entire time I stood there. I knocked 3 separate times over about a minute. The TV never so much as dipped in volume, like whoever was in there either couldn't hear me or wasn't in any position to answer. I called the building manager again that night. He said he'd check first thing in the morning. I never found out what he found because I moved out 2 months later for an unrelated reason and never followed up, and I still regret that I didn't push harder to know what was actually behind that door the night nobody answered. My husband and I bought a condo in a building that used to be a much larger apartment building from decades ago, split up and renovated into individual units sold off separately. The kind of building where you can tell the walls used to connect to something bigger because of odd little architectural leftovers. A doorway bricked over here, a hallway that dead ends for no clear reason there. The first several months were just normal new homeowner stuff, minor renovations, getting used to the layout, nothing at all out of the ordinary. The first odd thing I noticed was a section of our bedroom wall that sounded distinctly hollow when I knocked on it, unlike the rest of the walls in the unit, which were solid. Our contractor mentioned, casually, that it was probably an old doorway from when the building was subdivided, sealed up, but not fully filled in behind the drywall, common enough in converted buildings. Made sense. I didn't think much more of it. Then, a couple months later, I started hearing something faint from that specific section of wall late at night. Not knocking exactly, more like a soft scraping, occasional, unpredictable, a few nights a week rather than every night. I chalked it up to old pipes, or maybe even mice. Converted buildings sometimes have gaps that let pests move through wall cavities. Then we had a pest inspection done, specifically because of the sound, and the inspector found no signs of rodents anywhere in the unit, no droppings, no nesting material, nothing. He did note offhand that the hollow section behind our wall connected to what used to be a shared stairwell in the original building, now sealed off entirely on both ends, not accessible from any current unit. That should have been the point where I got seriously worried, and honestly it was, but my husband was more skeptical. Pointed out that old sealed-off spaces settle and shift with temperature changes just like any other part of an old building, and that scraping sounds from inaccessible spaces are actually a fairly common thing in converted properties, air pressure differences, expanding materials, that kind of thing. I wanted to believe him. Mostly I did. Then the scraping started to feel less random. It began happening at almost the exact same time each night, somewhere around 2 a.m., which doesn't fit a temperature or pressure explanation nearly as well, since those don't usually run on that precise a schedule. The night I stopped being able to write it off as building settling, the scraping stopped abruptly midway through, and was followed by 3 deliberate, evenly spaced thuds against that section of wall, hard enough that a picture frame on our side shifted slightly. My husband heard it too, this time. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. Then he asked if I wanted to call someone, and I honestly didn't know who you'd even call for something like that. We had a structural engineer come look at the sealed stairwell space from outside our unit a few weeks later through an access panel in the building's mechanical room. He told us the space was completely empty, just old brick and dust, nothing inside it, no way for anything living to have gotten in or out. He seemed a little unsettled by the question, honestly. More than a professional usually would be about a routine inspection. The scraping and the thuds still happen, less predictably now, maybe once every few weeks instead of nightly. We've mostly stopped mentioning it to each other. I think we've both privately decided that whatever explanation exists, we'd rather not go looking harder for it. I did food delivery for about a year in a mostly gig work capacity, which meant I was in and out of dozens of different apartment buildings every week, buzzing into lobbies, riding elevators, dropping food at doors. Most nights were completely unremarkable. Just a job, in and out. There was one particular high rise on my regular route, a building I probably delivered to 2 or 3 times a week for months, that started to feel different from the others in a way I couldn't quite name at first. Nothing dramatic, just a feeling every time the elevator doors opened on certain floors. The first specific thing I noticed was that on one floor in particular, the 11th, the hallway lighting was noticeably dimmer than every other floor in the same building, even though the fixtures looked identical. I figured a few bulbs were probably out and maintenance just hadn't gotten to it yet. Extremely mundane explanation. Buildings have deferred maintenance all the time. Then I started noticing that deliveries to that floor specifically always had unusually vague instructions. No name on the buzzer, notes just saying leave at door, don't knock, which isn't that unusual on its own. Plenty of people prefer contactless drop-off, but it was every single order from that floor, every time, worded almost identically, which felt like more of a pattern than coincidence should really produce. Then, delivering there one night, I noticed that despite the don't knock instructions, I could hear multiple distinct voices behind the door I was dropping food at, low, overlapping, like a small gathering, which struck me as odd only because the order had been placed under a single first name and was sized for one person. I did what anyone reasonable does with a job like that, decided it wasn't my business. People host friends over, people share meals, people put in oddly specific instructions for all kinds of ordinary reasons. Not my concern. Get the food there, move to the next delivery. Then, a few weeks later, delivering to a different unit on that same 11th floor, a woman opened the door herself against her own don't knock instructions, and before I could even hand her the bag, she asked, quietly, almost urgently, if I'd delivered to the apartment 3 doors down recently. I said I had, a few times. She asked if I'd noticed anything strange about it. I said not really, other than the standing instructions. She just nodded slowly, took her food, and said, just don't go inside, ever, no matter what they say, and shut the door before I could ask what she meant. I laughed it off with my next few deliveries elsewhere that night, the way you do when a stranger says something ominous and vague, easier to dismiss it as someone's personal drama than take it seriously. The last time I delivered to that specific unit 3 doors down, a few weeks after that. The door was answered slightly before the food had even fully arrived at the threshold, opened just a crack, no verbal thanks, just a hand reaching out, and behind that hand for less than a second, I caught a glimpse of the apartment's interior, completely empty, no furniture, no light fixtures on, nothing, despite the multiple voices I distinctly remembered hearing through that same door weeks earlier. I stopped taking orders on that floor after that, requested my app reroute around that building entirely when I could manage it. I never delivered there again, and I never found out what that woman meant, or why an apartment with voices coming from behind a closed door turned out to be sitting, completely empty, the one time I actually saw inside it. That's all 9 for tonight. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking around. It means a lot, genuinely, and if any of these got under your skin a little, that's honestly the whole point. If you want more of these while you're falling asleep, or just exploring quietly in the background, consider sticking around the channel. It helps more than you'd think. I hope you sleep okay tonight. Try not to think too hard about what's behind your own walls.